Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into a high stakes timeline that basically peels back the layers of a massive, complicated puzzle over at the Manistee Fire Department. We're unpacking a whole series of internal documents, resignation letters, and legal complaints. And what we're going to look at is the incredibly sharp contrast between what the city of Manistee has been publicly telling its residents about staffing and the rather alarming allegations of a retaliatory, toxic culture that we found buried within their own internal communications.
Right, so to really understand how this timeline unfolds, we have to start with the outermost layer of the onion, the city's public face. Back on May 6, 2026, the administration addressed their staffing shortages, and they basically categorized them as routine attrition. They assured the public that, hey, positions were simply being left open to save money, not because people were actually being terminated or fleeing the department. It all sounds pretty benign, right? But here's the thing. When you actually put that public claim of routine attrition right up against the internal records, that whole illusion shatters. A totally different narrative emerges, one that alleges a mass exodus, driven by a brutal workplace culture, retaliation claims, and some seriously documented imminent safety hazards. So let's look at the actual evidence. Take this resignation letter from a firefighter we'll refer to as FW1, dated May 3rd. She doesn't say she's leaving for better pay or, a career change. It gets wilder. Internal emails show these firefighters practically waving red flags, trying to escalate these issues to HR. In one message, WB1 explicitly notifies the HR director of a federal unfair labor practice lawsuit that stemmed directly from the actions of the city manager and the fire chief. And HR's response? They flatly refused to even meet about it, just telling him to report his complaints right back up the very chain of command he was complaining about. Okay, so with the internal communication channels entirely broken down, the whole situation takes a really dark turn. We are shifting from administrative workplace grievances to something much more serious: literal imminent danger and threats to human life. Now, you'd probably think the city would drop everything to fix these life-threatening safety failures, right? Actually, no. The administration essentially ignored the imminent danger, and instead, they decided to ruthlessly use their resources to hunt down the whistleblower who raised the alarms, hitting him with some absurdly petty charges. Remember WB1? Out of desperation, he escalated that very safety audit to State Representative Curtis Vanderwall. And the fire chief's response to this? He fires off an official, angry memo. But notice, the chief doesn't even bother addressing the non-compliant helmets or the dangerous staffing levels. No, his big complaint is that the tone and substance of the email might damage the department's reputation with policymakers. And the retaliation was instant. The very day after WB1 emailed the state representative asking for help, Chief Herndon served him with an official notice of a Loudermill hearing. They totally weaponized the personnel manual against him. Their big accusation? They claimed he spent an excessive amount of time typing on his personal phone while on duty. I mean, you can't make this up. The final disciplinary verdict came down and they suspended him for 5 days without pay. They literally categorized his desperate plea for state intervention regarding those safety issues as violating Section 3.2.14, sleeping, loafing, idling, or loitering. They called a whistleblower raising safety alarms loafing and engaging in political activity.
All of this brings us to the future of public safety in the city, and frankly, the final and darkest layer of this entire cover-up: the discovery of what critics are calling a secret steering committee. The city manager himself actually admits that they are intentionally keeping everyone locked out. The city formed this steering committee with neighboring governments to hash out a brand new fire district plan. But as this quote from a legal complaint highlights, the city explicitly stated that the committee is meeting privately, attendance is strictly restricted, and the general public, the people actually relying on this department, are just not permitted to attend. Well, a citizen named Douglas Dominic wasn't having it. He filed a meticulous, absolutely devastating legal complaint challenging these closed-door meetings. Dominic relies on the Michigan Open Meetings Act, arguing that, hey, if a public body creates a committee with appointed members to deliberate public policy, then by law, it is a public body. The city can't just snap the label private working group on it to hide what they're doing. At the end of his complaint, Dominic really hits the nail on the head regarding their motives. He calls out the whole charade, classifying it as a classic attempt to treat the steering committee as an informal working group to avoid public scrutiny during the early stages of a politically sensitive project. So, what does this all mean for us? It leaves us staring at this incredibly stark contrast between the city's carefully constructed public messaging and the reality of their internal records. They publicly claim it's just attrition. Meanwhile, internally, they're punishing personnel for loafing the moment they report actual safety failures, and they're locking the public out of future safety planning meetings entirely. Looking at all this evidence, it leaves us with one incredibly provocative question. If public safety is truly the ultimate priority here, why is the city fighting its own firefighters harder than the fires? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.